The Mets are expected to heavily pursue dynamic lefty Garrett Crochet this offseason via trade. What could a realistic trade package look like for the New York Mets in return to the Chicago White Sox? Let's get into it. All right, Mets fans, welcome back to the True Mets Talk podcast. In this video, obviously, we're talking about Garrett Crochet, dynamic lefty on the trade block. Before we get into some of the trade packages that you see in this slide and on the next slide, this one comes from Bleacher Report, and the next one will come directly from me in terms of what I think is realistic for Garrett Crochet from the New York Mets. I want to make sure that we go through our usual shameless plugs. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're new for more Mets offseason content, Hot Stove live streams, videos, polls, and more. And make sure you drop your comments in the comment section down below. I would definitely appreciate knowing what you all think surrounding this conversation with the Mets and Garrett Crochet. And above all else, we have to take a look at the Mets' need for starting pitching help, given the uncertainty of this rotation and the roster spots that are open. Obviously, the impending free agents, one receiving a qualifying offer in Luis Severino. We'll see if he accepts it or not. I would assume he won't, but there is a slight hope that he does. Sean Manaea being represented by Scott Boras. We don't know what the re-signing outlook looks like there. And obviously Jose Quintana as well. And with the Mets having championship caliber aspirations this upcoming season, do we rely on the internal candidates in terms of, your Christian Scotts of the world, Brandon Sproat, Blade Tidwell, etc., to kind of backfill those spots? I don't think so, because the Mets need a co-ace alongside Kodai Senga. I think any Mets fan at this point, given the uncertainty surrounding Kodai Senga and his injury kind of bug that has followed him over the past couple of seasons, will tell you that this move makes absolute sense in terms of bringing Garrett Crochet on board. Could be a co-ace, if at worst, a number 2 right behind Kodai Senga in your rotation. This was his first season in 2024 being a starter. Garrett Crochet was drafted to be a reliever out of the University of Tennessee in 2020, has had a little bit of an up and down career thus far, just in terms of the availability that he's had. Missed all of 2022 with an injury. The same injury kept him out for the most part in 2023. And you see here the complete numbers that he put up in his first season starting for the White Sox in 2024. And this is going to get the White Sox the best package for Garrett Crochet. When you talk about in comparison and contrasting, if they were to take an offer from the Padres or the Dodgers this past trade deadline, it would not have been as strong as what they are going to get from the Mets or anybody else this offseason. So you see here the numbers: 146 innings pitched for Crochet in 2024, 3.58 ERA. The strikeouts, right, with the electric fastball, with his vast arsenal, his unusual delivery being so tall and lanky makes it harder for opposing hitters to pick up the ball, and the strikeouts follow thereafter. This guy's a complete pitcher. This is everything you would want out of a number 1 or a number 2 in your rotation. But again, with the uncertainties, with the lack of sample size surrounding Garrett Crochet in the innings pitch category, and just the innings that we've seen out of him as a starter, we've only seen one complete season from him as a starter. How will that translate for him, this young 25-year-old dynamic lefty, in this upcoming season and beyond? Because he is under contract for 2 more seasons, and I believe he would not hit free agency until after that 2026 season, which will also bolster the trade package going back in return for Garrett Crochet. But this is what Bleacher Report had as a mock trade for the New York Mets if they wanted to acquire Garrett Crochet. Jet Williams, Carson Bench, Jonah Tong, these rankings right next to these names, these Mets prospects, come directly from MLB.com in their latest Mets prospect rankings of this farm system. And there has to be a definitive starting point in terms of the Mets and what they have to offer going into negotiations with the White Sox. GM of the White Sox, Chris Getz, has already made it known that in any package that they get back for Garrett Crochet, they want it to be dominated by position players, which the Mets certainly have a lot of. And when you take a look at and you listen to who the quote unquote untouchables are in this Mets organization, that will vary from person to person, from Mets fan to Mets fan. But for me, the untouchables in this organization are Drew Gilbert and Brandon Sproat. And a lot of people go back and forth in terms of the argument of Jet Williams versus Drew Gilbert. Quite simple when you take a look at the differences in outlook from, for the Mets outfield versus the infield and the names that each position group has to it. I think that Drew Gilbert is certainly in line to make a faster contribution for this Mets team than Jet Williams is, just simply in terms of who he has to go through in order to get that playing time, which is not many names in front of Drew Gilbert, whereas that is not the case for Jet Williams in the infield, right? And the Mets can address outfield with Juan Soto or Anthony Santander, etc. And we'll talk about that in our Mets Hot Stove Live tonight at 8 p.m. I'll toss that link in the description down below. Again, if you're not subscribing, a lot of Mets content, sometimes twice a day on this channel, talking about our favorite team from Queens. But, I talked about this on a standalone video in terms of how the Mets could address the center field position via trade or via internal candidates. And Drew Gilbert, if you missed that video, was part of those discussions. I'll link that video also in the description down below in case any of you all missed it. But, I think Drew Gilbert should not be included in any trade this offseason. And I think that it's realistic to acquire Garrett Crochet from the White Sox without having to include him or any of your other top pitching prospects. And Jonah Tong certainly is one of those guys. A fast riser within the Mets farm system in 2024, Jonah Tong had a lot of success. And if there's a world where the Mets can hold on to him and still be successful in trading Garrett Crochet, that's something that I would like to explore, which we'll see here in the next slide. Again, it gets into a little bit of a unique situation because this is so subjective and this is part of the fun in terms of having these conversations. But again, right, I am no prospect hugger. If you absolutely need to include Drew Gilbert's name, obviously I would be open and willing to do that. It would make the Mets job harder in terms of finding a consistent candidate to play center field in 2025 and beyond. But I would rather go down a different route. And this right here is a little bit too much for me in terms of a starting point of a mock trade package that the Mets can send over from Bleacher Report. Yes, they have a variety of prospects they could offer up. They could beat opposing teams' offers, right, that are also going for the services of Garrett Crochet. But if you don't need to overpay, then why do it? Especially for a guy that you're still trying to figure out if he can be consistently good and available for you in 2025 and beyond in Garrett Crochet. So this is a little bit of a different look from me in terms of what my mock trade proposal would be in comparison to either Bleacher Reports or what any other outlet has out there between the Mets and the White Sox. Obviously, Brett Baty, I really do think this Brett Baty experiment's over. I think he did play his last game as a New York Met. It just simply didn't work out. Mark Vientos, we don't know if he's going to stay at third base depending on what happens with Pete. We've had these, discussions if Mark Vientos is going to move over to first base or not in 2025, and that's still yet to be seen. But you have a lot of different names in the infield that are vying for these positions and these spots. Luis Angel Acuna, you take a look at a name like Jeff McNeil. We don't know if the Mets are going to explore trades for Jeff McNeil. The Mets could also bring back a guy like Jose Iglesias, etc. And there's a working dynamic of, again, in the rotation, are you going to trust in these young guys if you have championship caliber aspirations? And the same thing applies for the infield in terms of looking at the youthful talent versus maybe a little bit more of a veteran presence outlook. And the names that you throw out there. So the logjam in the infield is what made me put these top three names in this list as this mock trade for Garrett Crochet. And we continue to have these discussions. Jet Williams, again, I just told you all that, GM of the White Sox is going to want a position player heavy return. And I simply don't think that any team you trade with this offseason, if you're the New York Mets, whether it's the White Sox or anybody else, there's no chance that you're not going to include Jet Williams in that package. I think that that is the primary name that teams around the league are going to want. And quite simple, again, I've already given you my untouchables. You do it if you're adding a guy like Garrett Crochet to this rotation. But Ronnie Mauricio is another name that I would love to hold on to. And if there's a world where the White Sox would ask for Luis Angel Acuna over Ronnie Mauricio, I would do it in a heartbeat. But quite simple, if the White Sox are looking out for their best possible return, they're going to want to prioritize Ronnie Mauricio. Obviously, Ronnie Mauricio's name has always come up in trade conversations. This guy's electric. I've always been a Ronnie Mauricio supporter. It got a little bit gray there when we kind of didn't know if he was going to make it up to the major leagues or not, if he was going to ever play a major league game in a Mets uniform or not. But he got his opportunity in that lost 2023 season, 26 games. He had 2 home runs, a 248 batting average. But again, just like the tools that he possesses, right? 7 stolen bases, the speed that he possesses. He looked pretty competent out there at second base. He could also play third base as well, which I know a lot of Mets fans would like to see if Mark Vientos does make the move over. But quite simple, we also just have to be realistic in terms of not giving up too much, but also not approaching this situation with a laughable offer to the White Sox for the services of a 25-year-old ace that is under control for the next 2 seasons. So again, there is going to need to be, there's going to need to be a competitive offer out there. But to what extent is that competitive definition for the New York Mets? And Jonathan Santucci, which was the second overall pick, or not second overall pick, but second round draft pick for the New York Mets in this 2024 draft, has electric stuff, a great slider, electric fastball, 94, 95, maybe even sometimes 96, thought to be as more of a reliever. And that would be kind of the more comfortable approach for me in terms of the prospects that you give up and not needing to put Jonah Tong's name in a package going back to the White Sox. And Alex Ramirez, who I have been a fan of on record on this channel, went through another just down year in 2024. Still young, 22 years old, and another guy that could use a change of scenery just like Brett Beatty. So let me know, Mets fans, is this trade package right here on your screen more likable, more realistic? Does this get it done? Or do the Mets need to pony up an offer of a higher caliber, just like this one that Bleacher Report kind of mocked up? One thing is for certain is that David Stearns is going to make an aggressive bid to the Chicago White Sox for Garrett Crochet. We'll see if the White Sox take that offer or go with a different team. Appreciate you all tuning in. Let's go Mets. See you all on a future video.
Thank you for watching the True Mets Talk podcast. Make sure you're tapping on that notifications button and checking out all the latest content on the channel. Thank you.